There's a type of tiredness that doesn't show in the body, doesn't give obvious signs, doesn't attract anyone's attention. It doesn't come after a hard day nor a sleepless night. It's born in silence. A slow psychological weariness, too conscious to be ignored, too invisible to be explained. Maybe you're here because you feel it. Maybe you don't know how to name it, but you recognize its weight. A constant, almost philosophical, inner discomfort, as if something inside you is always at odds with the world and with yourself. Imagine a story that begins without screams, without explicit tragedies. A seemingly normal, functional, responsible person, someone who keeps to schedules, answers messages, moves forward. But inside, they wage daily battles that no one sees. It's not a fight against life, it's a fight against themselves. A practical, repetitive, conscious psychological conflict. A silent tension between who you are now and who you believe you should be. This is the part of the story that is almost never told, because it doesn't bleed on the outside, but it corrodes on the inside. You might think you're tired of the routine, the people, the obligations. But if you look more honestly, that raw, almost poetic honesty, you'll realize something else. You're not tired of life. You're tired of constantly monitoring yourself, tired of tracking thoughts, controlling emotions, adjusting behaviors to fit invisible expectations. It's a psychological exhaustion born from excessive self-control, from the constant attempt to be acceptable, productive, strong. An internal effort so great that it becomes automatic, unconscious, and yet devastating. Swallowing emotions becomes a habit. Pretending to be strong becomes an identity. Acting as if everything is all right becomes a survival mechanism. And the more you repeat this, the further you distance yourself from yourself. There's something profoundly philosophical about this. The mind creates an ideal version, a self that should exist, while the real self tries to keep up, stumbling over anxiety, guilt, and frustration. This internal friction generates noise, a constant mental noise. Thoughts that won't switch off, diffuse feelings of inadequacy, a psychological unease that has no apparent cause but never goes away. The problem isn't the world outside, it's not just the circumstances, nor the people, nor the external chaos. The problem is the constant noise inside, a critical, demanding, impatient internal dialogue, a voice that demands maturity, balance, emotional success, while ignoring basic human limits. This internal conflict creates a state of permanent alert. The body relaxes, but the mind doesn't. The day ends, but the psychological state remains active. It's conscious exhaustion. It's invisible wear and tear. It's the invisible struggle that no one sees. Perhaps you recognize yourself in this now. Perhaps you feel that subtle tightness in your chest, that feeling of, "This is me." That's the trigger for identification. Not because you're weak, but because you're human. There's a silent validation when someone puts into words what you've never been able to explain. This internal struggle isn't laziness. It isn't drama. It isn't a lack of gratitude. It's a real conflict between identity and expectation, between essence and performance, between feeling and controlling oneself. When you fight against yourself every day, even victory becomes a defeat, because every external victory costs a small internal loss. Every time you force yourself to continue without listening to yourself, something falls silent inside you. And perhaps the most unsettling part of this story is realizing that this war didn't start yesterday. It comes from a long time ago, and while you try to keep everything under control, something essential begins to demand attention. Not with shouts, but with silence. And that's exactly where this story begins to get deeper. And as this internal struggle continues, something begins to happen almost imperceptibly. It's not a collapse, it's not an outburst, it's not a dramatic event that justifies stopping everything. It's more subtle, more psychological, more dangerous precisely because it's silent. You begin to feel anxiety without a clear reason. Life, seen from the outside, seems organized, functional, even correct. But inside there is a constant state of tension, as if something is always about to go wrong. The mind doesn't rest. It anticipates, revises, questions, demands. Extreme mental fatigue accumulates. Not because you think too much about important things, but because you think too much about yourself trying to adjust. This type of anxiety isn't accompanied by obvious panic. It manifests as restlessness, as difficulty being present, as a continuous psychological noise. You wake up already tired, even after sleeping. The body functions, but the conscience feels heavy. Every simple decision requires a disproportionate internal effort. This isn't a lack of strength, it's not laziness, it's accumulated emotional exhaustion. A weariness that arises from the constant attempt to maintain control over thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, as if relaxing were a risk, as if being authentic were dangerous. And then something even harder to explain emerges, the feeling of emptiness. You do everything right. You accomplish what needs to be done, you act in a mature, conscious, responsible way. But at some deep level, something doesn't fit. There is no real satisfaction. There is no full presence. Just a diffuse feeling that something is missing, even when nothing seems to be missing. This emptiness is not an absence of things. It is an absence of inner connection, a silent distancing from oneself, caused by years of adaptation, of emotional silencing, of choices made more out of psychological duty than inner truth. In this state, self-sabotage begins to appear subtly, not as explicit destruction, but as postponement, procrastination, silent giving up. You don't move forward as you could. You don't allow yourself to feel enthusiasm for very long. When something starts to go right, an inner voice emerges that questions, minimizes, warns. This voice is not your enemy, but it has been trained to protect through control. The problem is that this constant protection comes at a high price. It keeps you on alert, prevents emotional rest, and reinforces the feeling of always owing something to yourself. There is something profoundly conscious and philosophical in this process. The mind creates a narrative where you need to improve before you deserve peace. You need to adjust before you accept yourself. You need to win an internal battle before you can rest. But this logic keeps the conflict active. The more you try to win this internal war, the further you get from the tranquility you seek. Peace doesn't come when you win the fight. It comes when you stop fighting against who you are. And this idea, though simple, is difficult to accept because it challenges everything we've been conditioned to believe about effort, control, and self-mastery. Perhaps you don't need to fix yourself. Perhaps there's nothing broken within you. Perhaps what exists is an excess of internal demands, an overly harsh psychological perspective, a constant requirement for consistency, strength, and clarity. Listening to yourself doesn't mean giving up on life or losing direction. It means recognizing internal limits, respecting emotional signals, allowing conscious pauses. It means exchanging rigid control for presence, exchanging self-criticism for observation. This doesn't happen all at once. It's a silent, almost invisible but profoundly transformative process. If all of this makes sense now, don't dismiss this realization. Don't treat it as just another interesting thought. What you silence continues to consume you, even when you pretend everything is under control. And I want to know if anything here truly resonated with you. If any phrase accurately described how you feel, comment, "That's me." If you feel this persistent psychological exhaustion, write, "internal burnout." And if on some level you realize that perhaps you don't need to fight so hard, comment, "Maybe I just need to listen to myself." Write it in your own words, too. I read everything,